Welcome back, AP. Now we get it. Now we understand. We just answered the why to the Renaissance. We just answered all the big why questions. Well, why did it happen when it did? Why did economics get so much better? Why was the Middle Ages so different from the Renaissance? Well, a lot of historians argue that the Renaissance never happened. A lot of historians also tend to argue that, this is just a periodization. We only call the Renaissance due to the fact that we need to be able to study changes over time, which I agree mostly with the latter. I don't really necessarily think somebody popped up one day and was like, oh, the Renaissance is here. It just shows economic growth, and that's more or less what it is, right? Economic growth. However, it did lead to a rebirth of intelligence. And a lot of that does go hand in hand with that economics piece. Where there's more money, there's more time to devote to study. With money, you can be financed to study. With money comes prosperity of intelligence. The return of economics in Europe pushed this concept forward. So we're now going to get into the what of the Renaissance. What makes it so different? What makes it so grandiose? What makes the Renaissance truly the Renaissance? And a lot of it revolves around this concept, Renaissance humanism. Okay, so let's get into it a little bit. We're going to get into right up to the early humanists. Oh, and by the way, this is your last informational flip of the summer. I'm going to cut it here because this is a little bit of a longer one. Your first one was really long. Your middle two were kind of shorter. But this gives us like the big thing, the jumping off point that we needed to get to with the early humanists, because I want to be able to talk about those people with you in person, which I can't wait. We got 20 days until we're actually back in school. So excited to see y'all. And remember, look out for that email. I'm also going to post one more flip as an example of how much you should know about your artwork going into the year, all right? So that will be your last flip for the summer, and then we'll get into everything else as time keeps rolling forward. So super excited to meet all y'all. But getting into it, though, let's talk about what Renaissance means. Renaissance is a debated term. So if you look at it in French, in its French origins, it literally means rebirth, okay? It can also mean renewal or revival, all centering around the same key concept of a return or a re-energization of intelligence and ideas in Europe. But here's the thing. Rebirth, renewal, does harken back to the idea that something is returning, right? To return is the same thing coming back again. So what is being reborn? If we were just in the Middle Ages and everything was so terrible, what's really coming back a second time? That's me and the wife, by the way. And no, we're not the ones coming back. Ancient Greek and Roman culture. That's what's being reborn. The Renaissance was a hearkening back to the days of antiquity, to the idea that, oh, the people that got it right, the smartest people in the world, those are the Greeks and the Romans. The Greeks and the Romans had it all figured out. They had philosophy and theology and plumbing and government and all the stuff that we started this unit with. All those things that they had, those amazing theaters, the architecture, all that stuff that disappeared in the Middle Ages is coming back again, right? Ancient Greek and Roman culture. Now, some of y'all are like, man, that's got to be good. They're going to have plumbing again? That doesn't happen for another, 300 years. But give them a break, all right? They literally forgot everything. All of the Middle Ages is defined by, what did we used to do again? Anyway, but ancient Greek and Roman culture is coming back. And the reason why I don't understand how that happened at all. But the reason why my wife and I are actually positioned right here is because this is my wife and I in the Roman Forum in Rome, Italy. All right, so this is the ancient Roman Forum. And for those of you who have actually taken Latin, you know what the Roman Forum is. The Roman Forum is the marketplace. It's the city center, right? And so the ancient ruins are still there. The Temple of Jupiter is still there. The Senate seats are still there. It's an amazing area. And I actually have a vlog on my YouTube channel. If you dig for it, you can find it. It's in the playlist, Mr. Terry Travels, where we actually went to the Roman Forum. The Colosseum is right off the edge of it. But if you look behind me, what's it look like? You've got the remnants, the ruins, hence why they're called ruins, because they're ruined, the leftover pieces of the Roman Empire, right? What happened to them? Why in the Middle Ages did these people let these items, these amazing pieces of work, these amazing pieces of architecture and evidence and just beauty, why did it turn into just piles of rubble? A lot of it has to do with the Middle Ages view of antiquity. All right, so after Rome fell, the middle-aged citizen, not Middle Ages in like their 30s, not me. All right, so the Middle Ages citizen, though, is going to take a drastically different view of antiquity. This is the building I always like to reference so kids can understand what I'm getting at. All right, that is the Colosseum. All right, the Colossus of Nero. Okay, the late. It's not late Republic. It's a Republic, though. It's like built during the Republic period. I think it's 100. I think it was opened in 101 AD. I'd have to go look that up. But anyway, this amazing Hall of Games was built and constructed when Rome was reaching its height. Okay, when Rome was following the rule of Augustus, following the rule of Julius Caesar, one of my personal heroes of all of history. Excuse me. But it was built as a monument to Roman engineering and architecture. It could seat somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 people. It had held games on a very regular basis, and it rivals any architecture you will find in the ancient world anywhere. Absolutely phenomenal. Amazing piece of just gloriousness. And this is what it looks like today. This is the outer wall of the Colosseum when you go see it in Rome. And some of you are saying to yourself, well, it still looks pretty good. Doesn't look too bad. Notice a couple of key things, though, that are a little bit different. See all the statues that used to line these areas? None of those are there anymore. Notice the smoothness of the marble that goes all over the edges. It's not there anymore. All of the parts of the edifice right here have been removed. Notice also these little pop marks, these little marks where it looks like someone's almost chiseled into the edges. Well, it's because once you round this corner over here, you see what's really left of the Colosseum. That's the Colosseum rebuilt as best as they could do it, following the Middle Ages, post-Renaissance era. That's what the Colosseum looks like now. And the Colosseum, that's me standing in it. And the inside of the Colosseum looks like this. All the marble seats are stripped out. All of the infrastructure is stripped out. The bronze rods from inside of it have also been removed. Dude, look, the floor has rotted away. Actually, this is really cool. This is the tunnel that the gladiators used to walk in underneath the entire thing. And over here, there were water tanks stored there. They used to fill it up with water and have naval battles in it and stuff too. But anyway, it doesn't look the way that it should. It doesn't look like it did when it was first opened. Now it looks like this. Mainly due to the fact that during the Middle Ages, as Christianity began to grow, and the need for the construction of new Christian churches and monuments began, the Middle Ages began to make a blind eye look at antiquity. They began to look at the ancients during the Middle Ages as pagans and despots and terrible individuals, and their relics and monuments and temples serve nothing more than to have their stone harvested to build Christian churches. So during the Middle Ages, it was a turn away from the ancient Rome. Scavenge what you can out of all of their old monuments and build new temples. That's why there are all of these little marks all over the outside of the Colosseum, because stone thieves would actually come in the middle of the night and chisel off parts of the monuments and sell them to people building new churches. And they would also dig in and remove the bronze rods that were on the inside of it that were support infrastructure. So the Middle Ages view of antiquity was let it crumble, let it fall. And they did. None of it was used to be maintained. And the main reason why is following the fall of Rome, the intelligence of Western Rome went with it. Most texts of ancient wisdom, including people like Cicero, Aristotle, Plato, they fell into the hands of foreign powers. Because remember, jump back again for a second. Did Rome ever truly disappear? No, just moved, right? Moved from the west where it was in the city of Rome, and it moved to the eastern regions towards Constantinople. Now, as Constantinople held on to all these artifacts and these teachings and these texts, they would eventually begin to be taken over and attacked and invaded by Muslim leaders and the growth of the Muslim kingdoms. Those texts would fall into the hands of Muslim leaders, and during their golden age, they would use them to prosper and create algebra and new numbers and scientific research, and the university system that we're going to talk about here in a second was actually created by Muslim kingdoms, right? So when it fell into their hands, the Middle Ages was now without, and most of them couldn't read Latin, and they didn't understand it, and they spoke in a different language, because remember, the Romans called them all barbarians, because literally, according to Romans, they just sounded like bar, 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 because they couldn't understand what they were saying. So when the Crusades were launched in the Middle Ages, Crusaders began to come into contact with these Muslim kingdoms, and they began to find these old texts, and they were like, well, this is not written by a Muslim man, and the Muslim troops would say, oh, no, that's written by a Greek. His name was Aristotle. And they began to bring those texts back to Europe. Cultural diffusion, war and trade, right? Cultural diffusion, there was a discovery, a rediscovery of the works of the ancients, right? Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, Euclid, Democritus, Diogenes, Titian, or not, Titian's an artist, Titus, and Epicurus. Oh, Epicurus is one of my favorites. Now, anyway, but going into it, though, so you found all these old texts now in the Crusades, right? The Christian warriors during the Crusades are discovering all of these old texts that have been translated into Arabic, and they're now translating it back into Latin, and then they're saying, well, we have all these old texts, now what do we do with them? Well, here's the issue. The crusading knight probably couldn't read, all right? But he did know that these were important volumes, okay? The core learning values of the early Middle Ages before the Crusades started were Christian values and theology, right? Basically, the only thing you learned about was your faith during the Middle Ages. You learned about Christ, his attributes, the spread of the faith through the apostles. You talked about the Christian beliefs, which is why the papacy and the Pope were so powerful. It was all anyone knew in Middle Ages Europe, right? But once they start to rediscover a lot of this intelligence, that begins to change. But why wasn't this more immediate? Why didn't, what are you going to do with these books? So now that you have rediscovered Aristotle's works, in Turkey, they rediscovered 3,000 pages of Aristotelian Aristotelian logic and understandings of Aristotle's learned ideas, and they brought them back. Well, where are you going to take them? Where are you going to actually bring them? Because most of Europe can't read. Where they end up, where these new texts and these volumes end up, they end up in the hands of the church. Because only 4% of the populace of Europe could read at the time. Actually, fun fact, just so you understand how few people could read during this time, the German word for a count or an earl or a noble or a prince, right, a larger ranking person in a kingdom, it's called Graf, right? And Graf in German means scribe. It means a person who can read, right? Like that literally was a symbol of like your higher status life and your higher status intelligence was if you could just read. So the church became the hub of the literate and the intelligent. And as these old books of Plato's ideas, Plato's Republic, as it began to come back into Europe through that cultural diffusion, through the Crusades, it came into the hands of the church. And the church would spend hours reading it, translating it, and copying it back into Latin. Particularly monks would do this inside of these things known as monasteries, right? So during the High Middle Ages, following these Crusades and the reemergence of some of these texts, you saw this rise in this thing called monasticism. And monasticism, or the monastic views of things, is the idea that these monks and nuns would live on these complexes together and devote their entire lives to their faith. And a part of their faith was understanding the Bible better. And remember, if you're going to be a monk or a priest, you have to know how to read. So they made up a large population of that 4% of Europe that could read. So they were reading it, translating it, copying it, and it's slowly beginning to eke its way out into the regular European lifestyle. Mainly because, remember, we talked about this a while back, if you were a higher ranking noble family, maybe not high enough to become a king or a prince, what was the next thing you could do? You could become a priest, all right? Like if you were a son of a high ranking noble official, you could become a priest, maybe even become pope one day. So a lot of this larger economic livelihood started going back into the church. These monasteries began to read, copy, and understand the differences and have this reemergence of this ancient ideas around the High Middle Ages, right? And this would later evolve into the university system. As those intelligent ideas begin to eke back out, it becomes a moniker of the wealthy to be able to read Latin and orate as necessary. This right here is the very first university that ever popped up in Europe in 1088. That's the University of Bologna, as in Bologna, like as in the region of Italy. But still, and then the other two are very famous universities as well. The other one being the University of Paris, and the third one being the University of Oxford, which was actually established in 1187. So, as you can understand, these reemergence of ancient texts is very, very important because these early universities specialize in teaching. It's supposed to have a ... little ellipses at the end, teaching a particular set of ideas. And in the High Middle Ages, they begin to teach one of the biggest ones is rhetoric. Rhetoric is the science and understanding of how to speak, how to use grammar, and how to write effectively, right? So intelligence is coming back. With that economic prosperity, intelligence is coming back, right? We're seeing the rediscovery of all these ancient texts. Another big one is law, right? Law, particularly Roman law. It's the only law construct they understood. There's only two places you could go to understand law during this time period. You could go to the Bible, and you could understand theologic law, or you could go to Roman law, which is the only thing they had. And the big thing is again, with that reemergence of economics, now you've got nobles and you've got other leading families who really want to get invested in this entire law thing so they can understand how much of that property do they truly own. And how can you prove in a court that it actually belongs to you, right? So theology, that one is a very important one. Theologic understanding still grew along with these other things. It did not go from the Crusaders bringing these texts back to the monks in the monasteries, then to the universities, and the theology kind of left out on it. Theology grew as well, all right? Theology, understanding the Bible, translating the Bible into different languages so you could better understand the intent of the original translation itself, right? The original Bibles were most likely written in Aramaic and then translated into Latin and then translated back into Arabic and then translated into, so theology also saw a great growth with the understanding of rhetoric that came along with it. Philosophy is another big one that we'll get into a little bit later on. And medicine. All right, so not really, but they thought they understood medicine a little bit better. They didn't understand doodly squat about medicine, but they thought they did. And what these are known as today, these things right here, you go to any university today, and if you major in one of these, you're majoring in what's known as the humanities, right? History is a humanity. So the humanities, of course, gives rise to the idea of humanism, all right? Humanism is the guiding light of the Renaissance, all right? So the Renaissance is more of a legitimate thing because of the rise of this belief and understanding structure, humanism, all right? So let's talk briefly about what humanism is. Sorry, that is not, it's just funny, all right? So that's not the original one. I'm sure a lot of y'all have seen that guy before, the Vitruvian Man. It's originally just a small sketch inside of one of Leonardo da Vinci's journals on anatomy. It's supposed to be the virtue of man, showing proportionality of the human body. This one's just funny to me because, it's funny. All right, so anyway, but humanism is going to see its rise in the Renaissance, and that's going to be the key crux of the Renaissance itself. Humanism is this idea that people, should study and emphasize the study of ancient culture to understand human nature and potential. You have to understand that humanist is a person that advocates for the study of secularism, right? Let's break that word down a little bit. Some of you are like, you just said that one ism is to understand another ism, and I don't understand either of those isms. Well, humanism is the study of an individual's place in the world and how they can be the best possible person they can. Hence, law, rhetoric, theology, philosophy. Those are your humanities. Secularism is the idea of understanding the world around us, right? Answering, why does that plant grow? Why is my dog so lazy? Why am I so good at golf one day and bad at it the next? I'm sure some of the dads that might actually be listening to this, or some of the moms that are golfers, would probably ask the exact same question. So humanism is the study of less of what was Christ's intention when he did this thing, and more along the lines of how can we as people live in this world in combination with Christ's teachings as well as the world around us. And do all those ideas have to be focused on religious-centric questions? Not at all. It can be anything. Why do we need to eat? Why do I need water? Those are humanist ideas. Humanism and secularism, right? And a lot of it revolves around this concept, individualism, right? The belief that singular humans are capable of great accomplishments, right? That I, as a singular person in this existence, can read and translate Latin. I can understand architectural concepts. I can understand the intention of Greek mythology and why they wrote it, why they used it, why they followed this plot pattern, right? The individual, right? The growth of the individual is secular, is humanist, right? Humanism, so important. Now, where are they drawing all this idea? From the ancient humanists, right? Ancient thinkers are the ones who inspired all of the early humanists, right? Ancient thinkers laid the groundwork for this next wave of Renaissance humanists to come along. And there are a lot of humanists, right? There are your early ones and then your subject-specific ones. So we'll talk about those guys later on. And your varsity level ancient thinkers are these guys. Plato, and that's me with Plato. Aristotle, and that's me with Aristotle. And Cicero, all right? So, and that's just Cicero. I couldn't find his bust at the Uffizi, but these are in Florence when I was there. So that's me and Plato. And you could say that I'm like a varsity level ancient thinker because I tell the kids all the time I'm immortal. The reason why I know this stuff is because I was there. But anyway, so that's Plato, Aristotle, and Cicero. And their big ideas are going to come by the way of rationalism, empiricism, and Cicero's a little bit different. We'll get to him in a second. So Plato happens to be one of the biggest varsity level ancient thinkers of all time. He is the student of Socrates, one of the very first students of Socrates. And since Socrates never wrote anything down, Plato was one of the people that actually wrote down the experiences, the thoughts, and the ideas of Socrates, trying to understand the world around him, the Socratic method, questioning things for people to understand their own ignorance, right? And Plato begins to then adopt a new way of thinking. And he called it, well, he didn't call it that. We call it rationalism. Rationalism is using human logic to understand the world around you, right? For example, he came up with a ton of different theories. A great one is the allegory of the cave, which if we ever get a chance to talk about that, we will, to try and understand human motivation and human decency, right? Another great one is the theory of forms, trying to understand why are we built this way? And it's mainly because Plato believed that there were two different universes. There is the ideal universe, and then there's the real universe. This is Plato trying to grapple with living, breathing, all of us right here by just using logic, trying to come up with some different ideas, right? And then you have empiricism, which is the Aristotelian idea. Aristotle was a student of Plato and followed in Plato's footsteps, but he changed the game. Instead, Aristotle is the opposite. He's an empiricist. Aristotle believes that observation is the greatest power of all. Not logic, trying to wrap your mind around it, but watching it happen and deducing ideas from it. He's an empiricist, as in empirical evidence. Aristotle, for example, tried to classify animals. He would be like, oh, well, my dog has hair, and she doesn't lay eggs, and she's warm-blooded, so she probably goes into this group, which would later become mammalia, right, or mammals. So Aristotle, very important thinker, also tutored Alexander the Great, fun fact. So a lot of other crazy facts I can tell you about him later on, like him and Alexander's wife Phyllis, but we'll get into it later. Now, Cicero is another really great thinker as well. Cicero, though, is different from these two. These two guys over here, Aristotle and Plato, are Greek, all right? Cicero is Roman. Cicero is the political theorist that believed that the Roman Republic needed to be returned to its republic roots, not its empire roots, right? So, well, it didn't have any empire roots. Because in Roman historiography, there are three phases of the Roman history. There is the kingdom period, the republic period, and then there's the empire period. And the empire period, you know the best, is being started off by Julius Caesar and his great-grandnephew, Augustus Caesar, right? Technically, it didn't start until Augustus because Julius Caesar himself was never actually truly named emperor. He was just a dictator, all right? So, but Cicero was the very first one to buck back against Caesar and demand the return to the Republican-style government. He was a phenomenal orator, and he used his ability to research and understand political trends to try and bring Caesar down and bring his viewpoints down and move back to Republican government, away from a dictator-for-life idea that Caesar was trying to push. This is also going to end up in Cicero's head being cut off and like tied to a rope and hung off the Senate steps, but like it's still a huge thing. Cicero said an amazing thing too. Cicero said, if you have a library and a garden, you will have everything you ever need. Love the guy, right? Even though he doesn't like my man Julius, right? Like, still think Cicero is awesome. Cicero also is a part of he's either a Stoic or a Cynic. I gotta look that up later. But yeah, so Cicero is a major figure in political theory, right? So then we have our JV guys. So this is important for you to start understanding. As we progress through AP European, you will be hit with some varsity level thinkers and varsity level historical figures, and you'll be hit with some JV level figures. The JV ones are important. It's important to understand who Tacitus and Quintilian and Epicurus are, right? It's important to understand who they are, but you might not reference them when you're writing, or you will probably never see a multiple choice question about them. You might see ones about Plato and Aristotle, though, in their reemergence in the Renaissance period. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's important to know all six. It's more important to know those top three, though, and then understand these ones as branched off of them. So, Tacitus was the original Roman historian. He wrote Roman history since the death of Augustus. Quintilian was the Roman orator supreme. Like, yes, Cicero was good, but Quintilian was the guy that, like, defined public speaking as a school of thought. How to get your message across, how to push it forward, how to do a better job. And then Epicurus is a very cool philosopher. Epicurus is the guy, he actually spawned Epicurean philosophy. This idea that the only thing good in life is pleasure. And if you have to control it so you don't get overzealous with pleasure, but the sustenance of eating and drinking and sleep give you that sense of pleasure, right? And Epicurus is a very cool figure, and his entire philosophy is very neat to understand because it's also it was demonized during the growth of the Christian faith, mainly due to the fact that it also talks about, death being like the end of the body and soul, so we don't need to worry about what happens to us after that point. But he provides another realm of thinking for early humanists to grapple with, understand, and deepen their knowledge, even though it might not necessarily be true, right? But that's where we're going to stop it. And then this is where we're going to start the first day when we have class together. We're going to talk about early humanists. Some of my favorite ones being Dante and Petrarch and Boccaccio and Bruni, and Alberti's not that great because he's kind of sexist, but we'll talk about that stuff later on. All right, so thank y'all so much. You guys have been great. I'll see y'all later. Can't wait to meet you. Stay wary for a couple informative flips, not notes flips, and look out for that email that'll probably be coming in the next day or two, okay? I'll see y'all soon.